This is the story of Ethan McCray, a retired ranger, and the incredible silent pact he made with a wild creature. It began not with a growl, but with a tear. How a matriarch bear, weeping on his porch, begged him to break the laws of nature and save her dying cub. It was 6 a.m. in the Bitterroot Valley. That time of morning when the light is liquid gold, the air is clean, and the world belongs to the quiet. I, Ethan McCray, stepped onto the porch of my solitary log cabin. 40 years I'd walked this forest as a ranger. I'd seen everything the Montana wild had to offer. I was wrong. What stood a mere 12 feet from me wasn't a warning. It was a profound, heartbreaking image of suffering. A massive black bear, a creature of immense power, the matriarch of this very territory, stood frozen. She was huge, her coat matted and shivering slightly, but her posture was one of defeat, not defiance. She wasn't challenging me. I felt a shock run through me because running down her dark snout, clearly, visibly, were tears. Real, thick animal tears, staining her dark fur. I've seen fear, rage, and hunger in a bear's eyes 100 times, but never this. Grief so deep, it looked human. Then the truth hit me, harsh and cold. She held something gently in her jaws, a tiny, lifeless cub. Limp, head tilted, just a tiny, fragile little doll of fur. I instantly knew this was a mother in absolute, utter despair. My ranger training screamed, "Get inside, grab your rifle." But the silence, the sheer, profound silence of her plea, held me fast. It was a plea that transcended language, transcended the law of the wild. Slowly, carefully, this magnificent, weeping matriarch stepped forward. With a delicacy that defied her size, she lowered the cub, the little one I would call Koda, onto my wooden porch. She then backed away, sat on her haunches, and stared directly into my eyes. It wasn't a threat. It was a handing over. It was a desperate final choice. I knelt down, violating every single rule the wilderness had taught me. I spoke to the waiting, desperate mother, knowing she couldn't understand the words, but praying she could feel the intent. "I see him, matriarch. I'll try. I will try to save your boy." She didn't move. She simply sat, a motionless shadow, entrusting her world to mine. I scooped up the icy, fragile cub in my old flannel coat. The only sound was the thudding of my own heart against my ribs. The decision was made, but the real test of trust and the real danger was still waiting just beyond the tree line. You won't believe how this bear proved her commitment and why I knew this was more than just a coincidence. I brought Koda inside the cabin. My small, safe haven was now an operating room. I placed him gently on my old leather sofa, scrambling for a heating pad, thick towels, and the pure mountain honey I kept for winter tea. My hands, calloused from years of chopping wood and rope work, felt clumsy and useless. Koda was cold, too cold. I held my breath, 2 fingers pressed to his tiny rib cage, trying to find the rhythm of life. Nothing. Silence. A dark, cold certainty settled on me. I was too late. I thought of the matriarch sitting out there, waiting for the impossible. I had made a promise. I would keep it. I rushed to the kitchen to mix honey water. When I glanced out the window, a jolt of ice water hit my heart. Matriarch was gone. My stomach dropped. Had I failed the test already? Had she taken back her trust? Then I heard it, a deep, earth-rumbling grunt right outside the window. Not a roar of aggression, but a sound of deep, agonizing frustration. She was pacing, a rapid, heavy walk back and forth along the edge of the property. She was losing her nerve. Her maternal instinct was screaming at her to intervene, to demand her son back. I knew this was the moment that would define everything. The very first sudden move I made, the very first sign of fear, could see my windows smashed and the whole house torn apart. I didn't flinch. I slowly walked to the door, cracked it open just an inch, and whispered with all the calm I could muster. "He's still cold, matriarch. I need to keep him warm. You need to hold on." The matriarch stopped her frantic pacing. She turned, her massive head lifting. She looked me dead in the eye, and for a terrifying second, I thought she would charge. Instead, she just breathed, a massive, shuddering exhale, like a mountain settling, and sat back down, turning her back to the cabin. She chose to trust the Ranger over her own instinct. She passed the test. I rushed back to Koda. Using the syringe, I managed to get 2 tiny drops of the honey water mix past his lips. Nothing. I watched. I waited. I spoke to the little cub about the mountains, about the snow, about his mother waiting. Then there it was. So faint I almost missed it. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch, a small rise and fall of his chest. Just one, but it was there, the spark of life. "You're alive, Wild Heart," I whispered, relief washing over me like a sudden warm wave. "You're still fighting?" I spent the next hour simply watching him breathe. The relief was overwhelming, but the fight was far from over. The spark of life was lit, but this was only the start of the battle. The next hurdle was far more dangerous than the cold, the deep, festering wound left by his attacker. You won't believe what a retired ranger had to use to stop the infection. The immediate danger of cold exhaustion was replaced by the silent threat of infection. On the phone, Dr. Sarah Jensen, a great local vet, was blunt. "Check for wounds, Ethan. He's been in a fight. It's likely an infection from a male boar." I found it. On his back leg, hidden beneath matted, damp fur, was a deep, lacerating bite mark. Swollen, angry red, and oozing. The infection was clearly running rampant. It was a wound that could kill him faster than any freeze. I had no antibiotics. I had no medical supplies. I used the only antiseptic I had, the hydrogen peroxide I used for my own occasional cuts. I carefully poured it onto a cloth and gently applied it to the terrible wound. Koda screamed, a tiny, thin, heartbreaking sound of pure agony. But the pain response was a good sign. His nervous system was still online. He was fighting back with everything he had. The matriarch heard the sound. I looked out the window. She was standing up now, watching the cabin with burning, focused intensity. I quickly went to the door, opened it just a crack, and spoke quickly. "It hurts, matriarch, but it's working. I'm fighting the bad thing inside." She settled again, slowly, but her eyes never left the cabin. The 4th night was the crucible. Koda's fever spiked to a critical level. He was shaking, convulsing gently, and fighting for every breath. I knew the infection was overwhelming his tiny body. I was terrified. This was the moment he might slip away for good. I held him close, wrapped in my warmest fleece, talking to him constantly about the mountains. I was exhausted, my own body running on pure adrenaline and hope. I watched Koda's tiny chest. It rose, then stopped. The movement ceased. His eyes rolled back slightly. I panicked. I gently placed my mouth over his snout, giving him the smallest puff of air, urging him to breathe. I tried again. Nothing. The silence was absolute. It was over. I had failed. I sat back, tears burning my own eyes. I had broken my promise to the matriarch. Then the faintest sigh. His chest rose and fell again. Slow, shaky, but real. He had come back from the edge. The infection had weakened him, but the heart of the wild held fast. He survived the night. He had given me a second chance. As the sun rose, bringing Koda a fragile stability, I heard the heavy crunch of tires on my dirt road. My stomach knotted. This wasn't the agency yet. It was Sheriff Dale Peterson. A good man, a man I respected, but a man of the law. He walked straight up to my porch, his face grim. "Ethan," Sheriff Peterson said, his voice flat, "I heard a matriarch has been seen for 3 days, and I hear you have a patient that isn't human." I didn't try to lie. I led him to the window and pointed to the matriarch, sitting just beyond my fence line. Then I showed him the tiny bandaged cub on my sofa. Sheriff Peterson stood silent for a long moment. He was a father, a rancher, and a man who understood the rhythm of the land. He looked at the wounded cub, then at the waiting mother. His face was a map of conflict. "The Fish and Wildlife Agency knows, Ethan," he said finally, rubbing his beard. "The report came in. They are coming to retrieve the cub and assess the mother. In 3 days, why?" He looked at me. An old friend to an old friend. "The law is the law, Ranger, but that bear chose you. I can tell the agency I didn't see anything for 48 hours. No more. You have 2 days to do what you need to do before the law makes the decision for you." The sheriff turned and left. I closed the door, my heart pounding. The law had given me a window. Now the greatest challenge wasn't medicine, it was an impossible moral choice with a ticking clock. The battle for Koda's life was nearly won, but the greater danger wasn't the infection, it was the law, and the clock was ticking down to 0. Next, Koda shows me he understood everything all along. The next 2 weeks were a blur of recovery. Koda healed fast. His wounds closed perfectly. He was now a small, clumsy whirlwind of energy, exploring the cabin, climbing my books, and batting at my bootlaces. He was playful. He was mine. I had named him. I was deeply, dangerously attached. He was no longer just a wild animal. He was a tiny, fierce creature who had fought death and won, right here on my sofa. But every evening, as the sun dipped behind the Bitterroot peaks, I watched the Matriarch. She was always there, a constant sentinel. Sometimes she would approach the fence, and Koda would give a happy, low chuff from inside the window. They knew each other across the barrier of my home. The sheriff's 2-day window had closed long ago, but the agency's arrival was delayed by a local wildfire. But I knew they could arrive any minute. I had to make the choice. That evening, the night before I knew the agency would arrive, I sat by the fireplace, rocking Koda, feeling his warm, recovering weight in my hands. The thought of keeping him here, raising him as a strange pet, stripping him of his wild heart, preventing him from learning how to be a black bear of Montana, filled me with dread. It was an act of selfishness. Love meant letting go. I put him down in his little nest. The decision was agonizing, a physical ache in my chest. I whispered to him, my voice thick with emotion, "I have to send you home, Koda. It's the right thing. It's what your matriarch expects. You belong to the wild heart of this mountain." As I spoke those words, the little cub shifted. He stopped wrestling with the blanket. He was fully conscious. And then he did something he hadn't done before. He slowly lifted his head and looked directly into my eyes. Not with fear, not with wild aggression, but with complete, serene understanding. It was the most profound moment of connection I had ever experienced in the wilderness. It was as if he was acknowledging everything: the struggle, the trust, and the impending farewell. He was giving me his blessing to return him. He blinked once, a slow, gentle blink that felt like a confirmation, then curled back up to sleep. I knew then. I wasn't losing him. I was simply returning him to the life he was born for. I had 2 hours before sunrise. I had to drive him deep into the forest, past the point of no return. What happened when the matriarch finally saw her son and me together for the first time was the most incredible act of thanks I have ever witnessed. I didn't wait for the Fish and Wildlife Agency. Before dawn, I packed Koda into a large familiar kennel, lined with his favorite blanket and a few treats. I loaded him into my old pickup and drove deep into the high country, following the old logging trails I knew like the lines on my own hand. I chose a clearing I knew Matriarch frequented, a wide, open space surrounded by ancient Douglas firs, with excellent cover, the kind of place a bear chooses to rest. I backed the truck up, opened the kennel door, and Koda poked his head out, blinking in the strange light, sniffing the real scent of the forest for the first time in weeks. "Go home, Koda," I managed to say, my throat tightening with a hard lump of grief. Koda hesitated. He took a few steps, then turned back, looking at me with confusion. He was torn between the warmth of the cabin and the instinct of the wild. Then we both heard it, the heavy, unmistakable sound of a large animal stepping through the underbrush. Matriarch. She emerged from the shadows, alert, massive, and powerful. Her eyes locked on me first. Then instantly she focused on her cub. I slowly, deliberately backed away 20 paces, lifting my empty hands, showing I was no threat. I was relinquishing my charge, fulfilling my promise. Matriarch let out a low, soft sound, a mixture of a greeting and a question. Koda took a few steps toward her, then stopped. He was still caught between two worlds. My heart was in my throat, watching the distance close between mother and son. They were almost nose to nose. This was the moment of reunion. Just as their snouts were about to touch, Koda suddenly spun around and bolted back across the clearing. He didn't stop until he reached me. He buried his small, healed snout deep into my chest and gave a quiet, loving whimper. A final goodbye, a final thank you, a recognition of the human heart that saved him. A piece of my heart walked away with him right there. I held him for a long, silent moment, feeling his strong, wild fur. Be free, Matriarch's boy. You did great. I gently nudged him one last time toward his mother. This time, Koda didn't hesitate. He hopped happily towards her. Matriarch met him, nudged him, and began a thorough, loving examination, making sure her son was whole, healthy, and ready to rejoin the wild. Then the true peak. Matriarch looked up. Her enormous dark eyes found mine across the clearing. And then, as clear as any human word, she did it. She slowly, deliberately tilted her head, a universal gesture of acknowledgement and thanks. It was a moment of profound, sacred validation. She knew. She was grateful. Then she turned, Koda trotting right beside her, and melted back into the deep woods of the Bitterroot, never once looking back. I stood there for an hour in the cold morning air, feeling the profound satisfaction and the deep, sad loneliness of a hero who has finished his mission. My world felt too big, too empty, without that small, clumsy whirlwind. It's been months. I'm back to my routine. But I still go to the porch every evening. And every autumn, right as the first frost dusts the mountains, I find it. A small, neat pile of perfectly arranged pine cones or ripe huckleberries left on my porch. Gifts. From the Matriarch, a quiet message from the wilderness. We remember, we are well. The bond holds. This story isn't about me saving a bear. It's about a bear saving my heart, proving that compassion is the highest form of courage. It's about a sacred trust that overcame fear, the law, and the seemingly impenetrable barrier between two very different worlds. It's the wild heart of Montana reminding a lonely old ranger that he is never truly alone. If this story gave you hope, if it reminded you that humanity and nature can find common ground, please share it with someone who needs a little faith today. Let us know in the comments below. What wild animal connection has changed your life? And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more true stories of courage and rescue from the American wilderness.